play out something like this. Jesus says, let down your nets on this side and we'll see what happens. I bet you'll do well. Simon says, hey James, you get a load of that. This guy thinks he can fish better than us. He's pretty good with the scroll of Isaiah, but I don't think he's much with nets. But we'll indulge him. What do you say? James and John and Simon, they know what they're doing. Even though what they're doing isn't working, and they're not getting any fish, they know fishing. They're kind of like us. Us being bishops and priests and lay leaders in the church who know how to be church. And despite the fact that our nets are coming up empty, we keep doing it the same way over and over again. Y'all know the definition of insanity? What? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And Jesus invites them to do things differently. And they are resistant, as we Episcopalians undoubtedly are. The most change-averse community on the planet, perhaps. You all know the light bulb joke. How many Episcopalians does it take to change a light bulb? Change! My grandmother gave that light bulb. It's in our DNA. But hear me well, this is what we must do in this time. To be followers of Jesus, we need to be listening to Jesus. Even if we're listening cynically, just like I think those disciples were. We need to listen to the voice that says, you need to change. You need to ask, in what ways will my message be heard in this culture, in this place, in this time? And we need to do that now. Now, change for the sake of change is not going to be helpful. But fortunately today with the baptism of Jason, we have an opportunity to remind ourselves what we need to hold fast to while we look for crevices and ways to connect with people. It's those 5 promises of the baptismal covenant that we will say together. That what we do in worship, the fundamentals of the apostles' teaching and fellowship, the breaking of bread and the prayers, that's all that we need to focus on in worship. Those are the fundamentals. This altar, the pulpit, is the place of Holy Scripture and that font. That's the critical pieces of the architecture of the church. And goodness knows we need to be a people of forgiveness. Forgiven and forgiven. Remembering that to forgive is always to give up something. And we can't miss in this fish story, we've got to be a people of proclaiming the gospel in word and deed. I always wish to edit the prayer book at that point and switch them around and say deed and word. Because that's really the way it's got to happen. And the last 2 promises give, I think, important texture to them. As servants, seeking and serving Christ in all persons. I mean, seeing Jesus in the face of the other. And not just your partner, your spouse, or your children, but those who wound you, those who frighten you, those who are smart and not so smart, pretty and not so pretty. The whole gamut. To see Jesus' face in theirs. And that takes us right to then undoubtedly being those who work for justice and peace. And if you really want to work for justice and peace, you do respect the dignity of every human being. This is who we are. This is how we differently cast our nets. And when we do that, the hall will overwhelm us. And you'll know that that's happening when you are overwhelmed inside. Note what happens with Simon. When he realizes what Jesus is doing with mere fishes, he looks inward and says, I am not worthy to be with you. I must flee. Just like Isaiah in the holy presence said, I am a man of unclean lips. So when we see the miracle of God in our midst, coming forth as we live out our baptismal faith, our first reaction would be, I can't handle this. But God, in God's richness, gives us this community, this interconnected web that is before me, around me, to make that possible. Even when we feel alone, we're not alone. Even when we think we're solitary fishers on the river, we're not. Maybe a story will help bring this all together.